On the following evening, Dew found himself standing before a 2-story building in the center of the city. Mary was saying her goodbyes to her beloved son while also hurrying in and out of the house to pack more and more items into a small bundle to a point where it almost bursted. Kevin didn't hold back his groans of complaint, which his mother stubbornly ignored, and went back into the house to get his father's straw hat in case the seatings under the shade were all taken. It was then when the two standing outside made a silent agreement to take the opportunity and leave. They were running late already, so their pace automatically quickened. The boy didn't talk to him, and neither did Dew. He did not intend on staying for long. Get the guy, show him how to get to the training area which had been converted to host the games, and drop him off next to Josephine, who had already been in the right place since the morning because Patrick apparently needed her for encouragement. Somehow Josephine had been right with her predicament of the weather. It was a hot day, as if summer was still in the land, and no clouds was to be seen on the beautiful blue sky. Dew hoped he himself wouldn't succumb to the sun, as he didn't have an overly caring mother, or a mother in general. They could hear the games before they saw them. Horns were blowing regularly while the voice of a man shouted through the stadium. Even though Dew couldn't understand a word from the distance, he assumed them to be the names of the colored little people lining up one by one, while the cheers and whistles of the crowd followed them before a large tent-like building in the center opposite to the path leading along the training area. In the construct, Dew could vaguely make out the silhouettes of the 3 people he served, and several other figures, perhaps the nobility sending their representatives to compete with one another. The one from the castle could be easily spotted by his dark blue clothes under the silver armor, the feathers on his helmet, and the cloth of the black horse he was seated on. As he approached the masses, who were all standing and sitting by the small brick wall, he recognized the man on the horse. So that's why Josephine was here earlier. Somehow she had managed to hide the fact that her dear husband was partaking in a tournament. Dew couldn't see her anywhere, though. At first he guessed her to be in the front row to watch her husband closely, or to at least wait for her nephew on the path, but she didn't. Even after minutes of searching, while the introduction had almost been finished, neither of them could spot her fluffy hair or yellow dress anywhere. At last they remained around the center of the watching crowd in hope of finding her at last. The people with their horses, except 2 out of the around 12 participants, began to move to the side. The 2 left positioned themselves on either end of a fence, which went on for around 30 meters. The riders received 1 lance, each matching their color scheme. "Now they ride towards each other and try to shove the other one off his horse," Kevin excitedly recalled next to him. The idea of making a game out of simply pushing someone into the mud seemed ridiculous to Dew, but he could see the entertainment in it. "Hey, someone is waiting for you," he then heard a voice beside him. As he looked up, he almost jumped to the side because of how close Avery had gotten to him without his notice. "Do you mean Josephine?" "Who else? She didn't want to miss the show, so she just sent me as her handy guard companion after she spotted you 2 over here," Avery explained and pointed towards the tent. "She's on the ground level over there and takes care of service. Just follow me." Wait, Kevin suddenly spoke up after quietly having his eyes dart back and forth between the games and the hybrid knight next to him. Immediately 4 eyes were on the boy, and for once he looked like he shrank back into himself. "You mean we get to go next to the VIP places?" he then shyly asked. Avery nodded and gestured to them to follow behind her. Dew noticed a sudden change in the boy's behavior. His movement was stiff but shivery at the same time, while the edges of his mouth twitched upwards. The older one almost suspected him to jump out of his skin at any given moment. The crowd cheered while the man in purple landed on the ground, but singular sounds of discontent could be heard while the group of 3 took the long route around the stadium towards their place. "And you built this from scratch?" Dew asked while they approached the tent. "Partially, yes. When we get to the ground level, you'll see we used one of the storage rooms as a base and built the rest of the structure around it. That way it'll probably be stable for the time it's needed. The gear's also still in place to be used for the games," she explained. The ground floor was about 3 meters tall. The left and right side were stabilized by a wooden wall on whose surface a makeshift stairway led up to the top level, where the higher-ups could enjoy the best view on the show. The second pair was already lining up for their third and last round, after which a winner out of the two would come out. The mostly open front part was partially blocked by the same cloth as used as a protection from the sun on the top level, but in the open spaces a broad table and several chairs were placed for the people not on duty to enjoy their time as well. You spotted several familiar faces among the secretive viewers. Josephine immediately went to greet Kevin and took him to a chair all the way at the front while discussing all he had missed and their speculations so far. More towards the back sat Aaron on a bench with one arm around Sue's shoulder. He was the only knight not wearing armor and seemed not to be bothered by it at all. Jonah paced up and down the open area, loudly commenting on the participants with cheers and slurs. Look, General, Jonah shouted towards Aaron. That's what you call opposition? They can't even hold their lace straight. Try holding that thing steady while climbing onto a horse, Sue commented for the man next to her. I could do it better, but no, you insist of having me wait here in case one of the losers out there collapses from a heat stroke. Dew bent over to Avery and whispered, Is that really what you're here for? She shrugged. Yeah, after the first 2 full rounds are over, we'll generally switch positions though. We're mostly here to prevent an outbreak of violence by the different fan groups. They can be a little hot-headed, but currently I'm more worried about him. She gestured at the bower. Jonah had built himself up in front of the overly relaxed Aaron. Jonah is dehydrated but refuses to admit it, Avery whispered. You could have let me in there instead of this scrawny pimp. Who thought that was a good option, huh? What does he have that I don't? The bower went on. Aaron slightly cocked his head and tiredly blinked. He was more than unimpressed by the raging man. First of all, he's likable and doesn't suck at what he does. Then, of course, he's familiar with the rules and sticks to them. At first we asked Avery to do it, but she didn't want to. He calmly explained while Jonah's head twisted around to his friend. Why did you decline, faggot? She seemed a little taken aback by the insult, but caught herself again and replied, You're acting as if the only reason they asked me weren't the 2 convenient flappers I have on my back. Also, you're not allowed to kill in these, so I'd be worried about slipping up and beheading someone by accident. And she's afraid of horses, Aaron added from the back. No, I just respect them and their personal space a lot. Her general giggled while Jonah smacked his palm against his own face. We also have to consider that the deadline for choosing our representatives was 5 months ago, Sue continued explaining, but nobody was listening anymore. Dew was watching the games as well during the conversation and had seen Patrick being shoved off his horse twice in a row before finally getting a point for himself. Of course he lost, but would later get the chance to compete against the other low-scoring opponents. Dew had no doubt that man would not return with a bitter look on his face, but Josephine would surely try to pity him. I swear if you would have wanted to, you could have replaced him, Jonah commented one last time, threw himself onto a chair and crossed his arms while continuing to watch. Avery took a seat as well, but on the complete opposite to him and patted the chair next to her. I'm actually only here to drop him off, Dew explained himself quickly after he noticed that the gesture had been directed towards him. Josephine's shawl fell off her shoulders as she quickly turned her head to face him. How rude of you, she reproved. Her hand moved towards Avery's leg to show comfort after the rejection, but she flinched away and gently shoved the woman's hand back to where it belonged. If I were him, I also wouldn't be here, the knight tried to defuse the situation, but Dew had already sat down. Keeping her company would only be fair to her, and to him it could also be an entertainment for the moment. Pair by pair competed. The crowd cheered and the crowd booed while the sun began to leave its highest spot. Jonah, the boy and his aunt were enjoying every moment, but Dew couldn't understand the greater appeal. Still his eyes couldn't leave the scene. Something dragged him back every time he slipped up and forced him to watch the same procedure over and over again. They lined up, received their weapons, charged, and someone was hit. Sometimes even the lance broke off, and they had to be exchanged with one without matching color. At some point Avery had begun to make lazy small talk. How was your day? She muttered, and he muttered in reply, Long, and the sun is frying the air more than the fireplace. What do you think about the event so far? Pretty repetitive to me. You? Agree, but tomorrow are the duels and the day after archery. Are you planning to do something after dinner? She then asked while resting her head and hand on top of his shoulder. I don't, at least not at the moment. Why? I'm just curious. Oh. Avery immediately stood up straight as an out-of-the-ordinary noise sounded from before her. The other knights also were on high alert and rushed towards the open area. That doesn't look good, Aaron commented. Who'll clean that up? The general gestured at the man in a dark green uniform who had just competed against the one in light blue and was now laying in an unnatural position on the ground. The flabbergasted shouts from the crowd could be heard loud and clear, and Josephine had shrieked. Avery, Martin, would you be so kind? Better check on him before they'll start a riot, Aaron commented, or rather requested the two dutiful knights who were the closest to the field. The two immediately climbed over the table to retrieve the fallen man. Josephine held her hands before her nephew's eyes while having her own closely shut. Because of that, she didn't notice the gaps between her fingers through which Kevin could observe everything happening around him in great detail. The man was placed on a ready camp bed, while a doctor from who knows where rushed towards it. He fell straight on his neck and basically folded over. There's nothing pumping in his body. Avery cut straight to the point before the medic could even check for a heartbeat. Most of the people in the tent were gathered around the new corpse in silence. Suddenly someone screeched from the front, I didn't know people could die in this tournament. Ah, cut it, Josephine. Everything on earth can kill you if you're stupid enough, someone bursted out. All eyes were suddenly on Dew, who was standing not far from everyone else. Only then did he realize that it was him who had just spat out that comment. Jonah broke out into shrill laughter, which gained him several indignant stares. But they were distracted shortly after as the noise of sobs ran through the air. Fully overwhelmed, Dew watched as large tears travelled down the woman's cheeks, while her trembling fingers were deeply buried in the folds of her yellow dress. Without a warning, she ran out, leaving her nephew and everyone else behind. The following discussion between the knight involved the dealings with the corpse and the public image, while other servant women collected in a corner and whispered. Dew still heard them. They were talking about him. How rude he was to say that to her, a pregnant woman who had a husband in the army and in this tournament. In the end, a shroud was laid on top of the corpse. Further preparations would have to wait until later, during the first small break where the crowd would disperse and wouldn't notice the death of one of their champions yet. The smell would wait. The storage room, as a building consisting of stone bricks, was cold enough to preserve it for at least a bit. Dew was trapped in his place. He could no longer go to the castle due to the risk of meeting the woman he had accidentally hurt again. The outside was too loud as well. Then there was this other factor which had him tied to the tent. Kevin was still sitting in the same place as before and was just as unsure as him of what to do and where to look. Dew sat down beside him and buried his pale face in his hands. Do you want to continue watching? He asked Kevin. I think so, he replied, a little hoarse, so they stayed where they were. A pair of arms in a white blouse wrapped around his shoulders and neck. I wouldn't say you overreacted there. It was a little too straightforward in my opinion, but true. Avery spoke directly into his ear and squeezed him tightly. Then she let loose, or rather she had been pulled back by Jonah stepping up as well and claiming, I would have done the same, I'm proud of you. He boxed Dew's arm, but almost knocked him into Kevin. I have a collar, grab me by that if you have to, Avery complained from behind Dew, and he saw how Jonah's hand immediately shot upwards. The following noise indicated her slapping it away harshly. Stop it, please, your fingers don't want to be pulverized, right? Of course the boa took it as a challenge. Dew turned around and watched as Avery continued to block his hand movements, which soon transformed into full-on punches, while he dramatically complained, Why don't you just let me touch your horns? We're friends. Avery kicked him against the lower leg as he got too close. It's really darn sensitive. I wouldn't touch your inner thighs, would I? Jonah laughed. You told me about 2 months ago that your senses turned down a ton during your first year in the army. Well, Avery grabbed Jonah by the collar and arm. It's returning. She slammed him into the dirt ground by putting one leg behind his to push him over by the collar. He jumped right back to his hooves and took on a fighting stance before Avery, who calmingly lifted her hands, claimed, "I don't want to fight right now. I'm dizzy." "Oh, come on!" The musical horns blew again to announce the end of the competition of the first round. As if it was a signal directed towards him, Jonah jolted forwards and took her down, which forced her to wrestle for her freedom. Dew heard himself shout, "Just listen to her." Naturally, he didn't do so. Dew watched as she tried to sit up while pushing him away from herself, but there was neither strength nor will left to fight in her. Her head crashed into the ground, while her horns forced her to turn to the side. The pink eyes turned white as they rolled up into her skull. Jonah already had her hands pinned. She was panting and still struggling against the grip. Dew got up from his seat. The music had ceased. The announcer had finished speaking, but another voice now loudly read out the names of the round's winner. For the first time, Dew had witnessed the king speaking loud and steadily. Her body collapsed. Her hands laid still on the ground. Not a single breath could be heard from her, while her empty eyes stared through Dew, who had made his way through the maze of thrown-over chairs. The first time he had his heel come crashing down on Jonah's ribcage was to startle him. The second had him roll away to the side and groan in pain. Dew ignored him, his eyes solely resting on Avery. He picked up her limp body and had her lean against the leg of a pole, while he held her head stable between his hands, also shielding her from any noise. Jonah had gotten up again and walked towards him. "Did I go too hard? Did he actually break?" he asked, and bent down with concern written all over his face. "Get the fuck away," Dew spat without moving a muscle. The other actually backed off. For once he noticed that he had crossed the line, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Dew placed her head on his shoulder while she was about to slump over again. The body was warm, but the movements were that of a corpse.